The find wasn't made in a lab. It was made in the sands of Egypt. The oldest scrolls say it happened when Pharaoh Neferhotep was in charge. Priests who played with copper jars, vinegar, and iron rods made more than simply small currents. They made a surge, a stream of lightning that jumped from their hands to the stone walls. The spark made the room dazzling than 100 torches. The priests fell on their knees and shook. They named it Ra's breath, the heavenly fire that mortals could hold. Reality 502 changed from that point on. In just a few decades, pyramids went from being silent graves to huge power plants. Copper veins cut into their sides carried electricity through the city of Thebes. At night, obelisks sparkled and threw blue fire across the desert dunes. Merchants walked on lit-up streets while boats on the Nile moved with engines that hummed instead of sails. But Egypt wasn't the only one. People in empires heard about the lightning quickly. Roman engineers who wanted to outdo the Greeks stole the knowledge from Alexandria. In less than 100 years, Rome was brighter than any other metropolis. Marble columns were wired with copper. Aqueducts carried not only water but also insulated channels. And in the huge forum, people watched as the first electric chariots sped by, their wheels gleaming with light. The globe had moved forward 2,000 years. When Julius Caesar became emperor, the troops weren't just armed with steel anymore. They had lightning spears, which were like old rifles that sent out sparks of energy. Shields were buzzing with magnetic fields. Battles that used to last days were over in minutes. People who had been conquered didn't talk about Rome's discipline. They talked about its thunder. Philosophers in Greece argued about whether or not man had surpassed the gods. Socrates said that having power without wisdom would lead to disaster. But others, like Archimedes, gladly welcomed the fire and built machines with spinning copper coils that powered whole cities. The Mediterranean lit up at night. From Carthage to Athens, ports were lit up by lights that cut through the black water. Instead of using stars to find their way, sailors now used electric beacons that rose from towers. To people from faraway places, it looked as if the gods themselves had come down and given people a second sun. But there were dark sides to advancement. Forests disappeared to make fires that melted copper and iron forever. People didn't tie slaves to create monuments. They did it to mine the veins that fueled the grids of empires. Wars got worse as kings got lightning cannons and charged armor. In this new world, the weak had no place. Electricity was now the currency of survival. And then a whisper started. The earth can't last forever with so much hunger. The first disaster happened in the city of Rome, while Emperor Septimus Aurelius was in charge. Scholars had built the ether core, a huge engine under the Colosseum that was supposed to power all of Italy. For weeks it buzzed with glory, sending trams down cobblestone streets and lighting up every villa. People called it the heart of Jupiter. Then, one night, the heart broke. Witnesses said the roar sounded like 1,000 storms. Lightning came out of the Colosseum and into the sky, breaking up clouds and setting them on fire. White fire burned down whole neighborhoods. In a matter of seconds, tens of thousands died. Survivors talked of shadows carved into stone walls where families used to live. Rome rebuilt, but the lesson stayed with them. They had found power, but it was hard to keep. And so, Reality 502 moved onward, not in balance but in growth. Egypt, Rome, Greece, and Persia all tried to beat each other, each thinking it could handle the storm. But the same reality was behind every shining obelisk and humming engine. People had taken lightning too soon, and every spark smelled like ashes. The destruction of the Colosseum didn't stop Rome's hunger. It only made it worse. What had once was considered tragedy was now called sacrifice, which showed that the gods had tested the empire's strength and judged it worthy. The Senate passed new laws that called for more copper mines, more research, and more weapons that could shoot lightning for the legions. Rome wouldn't slow down, but neither would its competitors. The Persians in the east watched with caution. Their engineers looked at Roman lightning spears that had been taken in combat and took them apart to learn how their humming cores worked. Within a few years, Persia showed off its own wonders. War elephants with electric shields and towers that crackled with blue electricity, standing vigil over their borders like silent storms. The Greeks, who were always interested in philosophy and new ideas, transformed electricity into science instead of war. People who followed Archimedes in Alexandria built spinning dynamos that powered whole neighborhoods. In Athens, brilliant amphitheaters resound with discussions not by torchlight, but by the light of collected lightning. They didn't want to know how to win battles. They wanted to know how to change people. Could electricity help wounds heal? Could it make life longer? Egypt, where the flame came from, wouldn't let itself be overshadowed. Pharaohs put a lot of money into their pyramids, which are today huge power stations that send energy across the desert. Priests turned into scientists who studied magnetism and current, and temples became research halls. At night, electric barges moved softly on the Nile, showing that Ra's breath had never left their hands. The Mediterranean became a hotbed of light and ambition. As things became better, competition grew. Rome said it was in charge of lightning and asked a tribute from conquered countries in copper and iron instead of gold. But Greece fought back, and its philosophers made fun of Rome, saying it was like a child holding thunder without knowing how to use it. Persia worked in secret, sending spies into Roman cities to acquire plans and bribing blacksmiths and engineers with promises of riches. Soon, even diplomacy was full of energy. At the Council of Carthage, diplomats met under bright chandeliers that were powered by batteries from Egypt. The auditorium was full of bright lights, yet every grin hid doubt. Delegates muttered about alliances that changed with every flash of light. Marcus Varro, a Roman senator, said in his journals, "We live in a time when nations trade sparks like they used to trade swords. But no one can sheath lightning." Then came the first big betrayal. A Roman engineer who was fed up with the Senate's never-ending desire for conquest ran away to Athens across the sea. There he told the Greeks about the perils that Rome didn't pay attention to, and he told them about the ether core. The news spread quickly. The empire's biggest strength was also its biggest weakness. Rome's anger was quick. Spies were sent out, and then killers came after them, but the harm had already been done. In just a few months, Greek innovators presented their project, the Beacon of Prometheus, a huge tower that would gather lightning from the sky and store it for people to use. People all over the world gasped. If it were finished, Athens would be able to control storms on its own. Persia and Egypt couldn't stay quiet. Persia said it would build the Crown of Fire, a series of electric fortifications that would connect Babylon to the Indus. Egypt showed off its own wonder, the obelisk of Ra, a pillar that was taller than any temple and glowed day and night as a sign of God's power being used for good. It was no longer a new idea. It was an escalation. By 200 BCE, Reality 502 was no longer like the history we knew. The Mediterranean at night glowed brighter than any future metropolis. Lighthouses lit up the sea lanes with electricity. Soldiers fought with weapons that sounded like storms. And philosophers talked about a truth that was darker than victory. If someone had stolen lightning too soon, then one empire's victory could signal the end of the world. The race was no longer about staying alive. It was a race to see who could control the storm first, before it burned them all. Not at Rome or Athens, but in the borderlands where empires met like flint, the first sparks of war flew. It started with a fight between Roman legions and Persian troops along the Euphrates. People used to fight these kinds of fights with swords and shields, but the fight in Reality 502 was different. The Romans marched with lightning spears in their hands and shields that hummed with unseen power. The Persians sent armored elephants with electric towers on their backs. As they charged, bolts flew from their tusks. The valley flared up like a storm stuck between two mountains. Not because of steel wounds, but because of currents searing through their armor, soldiers yelled. Witnesses said that the sky itself got darker as the force released bent clouds into vicious spirals. What could have been a fight at the border turned into the start of the first battle of thunder. Rome said that Persia was a threat to the balance of power. The Senate, still shaken by the Colosseum disaster, put a lot of money into weapons. In every province, workshops pounded copper into coils to make a new generation of guns that shot lightning with deadly accuracy. Persia, not wanting to give in, called on its friends. Babylonian experts improved the Crown of Fire by adding walls that hummed with electricity. No Roman could cross these walls without being burned alive. Soldiers marched in caravans behind electrified banners, their yells mixed with the sound of electricity. And the Mediterranean watched as the battle drew others into its tempest. Egypt said it was impartial, but it couldn't stay quiet. The pharaoh's advisors told him to be careful, but rumors spread that Egyptian engineers were surreptitiously sending energy devices to both sides, playing a risky game of power and profit. Ships on the Nile didn't carry cargo. Instead, they carried batteries and coils hidden in their holds. Greece, on the other hand, was on the verge. Athens had not forgotten the Roman betrayal or the engineer who warned them about the ether core's faults. As the Beacon of Prometheus got closer to being finished, They waited with their hands ready to tip the scales. There were two sides to the globe, and the storm brought everyone together. Antioch was the site of the first big conflict. Roman troops, shining with iron and copper, fought Persian armies on plains that had turned into an inferno of sparks. Electric chariots with lighting wheels ripped through the lines of troops. The Persian towers shot arcs of lightning that went through shields like paper. The ground became black, trees caught fire, and entire regiments disappeared in waves of crackling electricity. From the walls of the city, regular people stared as storms that were neither natural nor divine tore across the sky. Mothers veiled their children's eyes as men died not from arrows but from flames that they couldn't see until it hit. Antioch was the first city to see the end of the world caused by people. But still, victory did not arrive. Both sides lost the battle. Rome said it had won, and Persia said it had fought back. But the fields told a different story. Piles of ash, ruined equipment, and bodies burned beyond recognition. People began to whisper for the first time. Had people awoken powers that were too big to handle? The philosophers in Athens talked about things. Plato's successors contended that the war validated Socrates' prior admonition. Power devoid of reason leads to destruction. But generals recognized a chance. If the Beacon of Prometheus could bring lightning down from the sky, Athens may become the ruler of all. The priests in Egypt had the same doubts. They stood in front of the flaming obelisk of Ra and wondered if their divine fire had been cursed from the start. But the pharaoh put an end to any dissent. He said, "The gods would not have given us lightning if they wanted to punish us. They would have left us in the dark." The Thunder War didn't finish. It got bigger. By 150 BCE, every empire had blood on its hands. Alliances changed as swiftly as sparks. Rome wooed Egypt, Persia wanted Greek wits, and Athens whispered about staying neutral while getting ready for the storm. The Mediterranean seemed brighter than ever, yet there were shadows of anxiety underneath the light. Farmers cursed the day the spark was formed, merchants yearned for seas without electrified blockades, and slaves dug tirelessly for copper that powered the war engine. Reality 502 was in its first global war, but it wasn't fought with swords. It was fought with storms. And every power thought that the thunder would only crown them. The War of Thunder went on, but in Athens another storm was brewing. Scaffolds made of bronze and copper rose into the sky on the Acropolis. Wires hummed with current that had been caught and sent to the huge tower that had taken decades to create. The Beacon of Prometheus was taller than any other landmark in the globe. It was part temple, part weapon, and part miracle. Its crown was covered with coils that were meant to pull lightning straight from the sky. There have been rumors going around the Mediterranean for months. It scared Rome, Persia hated it, Egypt wanted it. But no one had the guts to stop it because attacking Athens now would mean death. If the beacon functioned, Greece would own the skies, and the world held its breath the night before it went live. Athens shone like a second sun that night. People crowded the streets chanting, singing, and giving wine and grain to gods they weren't sure whether to worship or replace. Philosophers openly argued, had humanity gone beyond Olympus, or had it just stolen another fire that it couldn't control? Spies from every empire watched from the shadows of the Parthenon. Roman senators dressed as merchants, Persian operatives dressed as desert dwellers, and Egyptian priests dressed in silence, all waiting for history to change. The engineers from Athens, dressed in white, climbed the tower. The air got thicker. Clouds accumulated in an odd way, as if the skies themselves were pulling the edifice down. Callimachus, the main scholar, lifted his arms. Tonight, Prometheus gets his revenge. Tonight, people don't steal lightning from the gods. They steal it from the sky itself. He pulled the lever. The world broke apart. Chains of white fire hit the beacon's coils, and bolts of lightning fell down. The storm didn't cause disorder. It bent, funneled, and controlled. The tower glowed with an inconceivable brightness, brighter than the sun at morning. Athens was the center of the universe for a heartbeat. People gasped, some fell on their knees, and others screamed in awe. The spies stopped still, forgetting what they were supposed to do. The air was full with raw energy that made every bone and stone vibrate. Then, the impossible happened. The beacon pulsed with sound as well as light. A deep resonant hum resonated across the Mediterranean, across mountains, into deserts, and on waves. Ships as far away as Carthage shook when their sails caught fire. Egypt's obelisks sprang to life, shining brighter than ever. Roman weapons went off by accident, making sparks fly in their warriors' hands. The Persian towers along the border were full of vitality they hadn't called forth. The beacon had not only attracted lightning, it had also connected all of the world's grids into one storm. After glory came panic. In the streets, candles caught fire by mistake, and sparks jumped from copper wires to wooden beams, setting houses on fire. Lightning flickered across the masts of ships in the harbor, setting them on fire. As the beacon got louder, thousands ran away. The sky over Athens turned black and became a storm. Callimachus yelled orders from the tower, but the storm was too loud for anybody to hear. Some people said they saw his body highlighted in fire before it disappeared into the light. Rome's spies observed in fear from a distance. One said in a low voice, "If this is their victory, then it is also their death." The aftermath was chaos. The beacon still stood, shining weakly like an ember that wouldn't go out, even if half of Athens was in ruins. Some people said it was a curse, while others said it was a miracle. To the empires that came after, it showed what might be done and what should never happen again. Rome said it was too unsafe to live in Athens. Persia started putting together soldiers to march west. Egypt got ready for war by tightening its grip over the Nile. But beneath all the fury, one truth was undeniable. The beacon had changed everything. Empires were no longer just competing for power. Now they were racing against death. The question was no longer who would win the storm. It was about whether anyone could make it through. Athens had withstood its own greatness, but the Beacon of Prometheus made the world shake. Now every kingdom knew that the storm was not just a weapon. It was also a scourge. And still, no one stopped. Rome rebuilt its forces with new designs. Thunder-chariots propelled by spinning dynamos that could throw bolts farther than any spear. Persia grew its crown of fire, and the strongholds were so full of vitality that they could be seen for miles. Egypt built obelisks that were taller than mountains. Their incandescent tips channeled the desert's relentless sun into electrical fury. Every empire said it was getting ready to fight. Every empire secretly planned to attack first. In 112 BCE, what had to happen happened. The fire started in Alexandria, Egypt's most beautiful city. For years, its great library kept secrets about lightning in scrolls that described inventions, weapons, and experiments that were not allowed. When Roman spies tried to seize these records, there was a fight at the harbor. There was a fight between soldiers, lightning rifles went off, and ships caught fire. But the true calamity happened when the fire got to the city's main grid. Alexandria was the city on Earth with the most electricity. Its streets were brighter than the stars, and its lighthouses shone like beacons to half of the Mediterranean. The whole network shook when the fire spread to its power lines. Witnesses said that arcs of uncontrolled energy shot from tower to tower, making the sky look like it was ripping apart. Lightning struck roofs, bridges, and docks in a row. Before they broke, statues of pharaohs burned white-hot. The harbor was boiling, and suddenly the library itself caught fire. Scrolls that held centuries of knowledge and thousands of discoveries caught fire all at once, and their flames fueled the storm. Knowledge was not lost or stolen. It was gone in one night of fire. The disaster in Alexandria should have been a warning. It turned into a trigger instead. Rome said the episode showed that Egypt was not stable. Persia said that Rome was to blame. Athens said both were too proud. Within weeks, war announcements spread like sparks across barren landscapes. The Mediterranean fell into chaos. Roman ships fought Egyptian barges near Carthage. The decks of the barges were mounted with lightning cannons. The sea became a graveyard of ships on fire, with arcs of blue flames jumping over the waves. The water boiled underneath them, and sailors screamed. The storm engine was a weapon that had never been seen before in Babylon. Huge towers spun coils so quickly that the eye couldn't keep up. This caused lightning storms that stretched across the sky. The skies showered fire, and whole Roman legions disappeared. People who lived through it said the ground sparkled for days following. In Athens, the beacon was awakened again, not as a symbol but as a weapon of last resort. As their work, which was supposed to provide light, turned into a sword piercing into the sky, philosophers cried. Lightning struck Roman camps, killing thousands of people. But the storm didn't stop where it was supposed to. It got bigger. Villages outside the city burned down, and the people who lived there died from friendly fire. The conflict of thunder had turned into the storm of ashes. By 100 BCE, reality 502 was on the edge. The empires that used to be great were now darkened. The fields didn't grow anymore because the currents were too strong and burned the soil. Cities that used to shine with light were now flickering in ruins. Not from poverty or pestilence, but from the same brilliance that was supposed to save them. Millions had died. But the leaders still wanted more. Rome promised to make weapons that were stronger. Persia wanted to be able to regulate storms all the time. Egypt committed to build new obelisks to take the place of the ones that fell. No one would accept it. Humanity has outgrown its soul. From the ashes of Alexandria, a single phrase spread, whispered in every broken street, burning market, and scorched temple. Maybe the gods didn't punish us. Maybe we were the ones that got in trouble. The first apocalypse had come, not from a story or heaven, but from people clutching lightning too soon. And the quiet that followed was not peaceful. It was filled with the crackling of storms that were still waiting to be let loose. The Mediterranean stopped glowing at the end of the 1st century BC. Cities used to shine brighter than the stars. Their towers hummed with collected lightning, and their streets were full with light. Now those same towns were just charred shells, with their copper veins twisted into useless piles of rubble. Rome's thunder-chariots rusted on roads covered in blood. The coils of Persia's storm engines melted from their own rage as they sat still. The broken obelisks of Egypt lay scattered across the sands, blazing dimly like embers of a fire that was too big to put out. The world has learned how much it costs to be brilliant. Then, there was famine. Uncontrolled currents burned up farms and broke irrigation lines, which made crops die. The waters, which used to be full of electrified fleets, became quiet, with just wreckage floating on the waves. Merchants no longer traveled from port to port. They simply looked for food, water, and survivors. The empires, which were once unbeatable, broke apart. The Senate of Rome turned on itself and blamed generals for losses that no victory could erase. Persia's monarchs were deposed by their own famished army, who were drunk on storms they could no longer call. Once, Egypt's pharaohs were gods in their shining temples. Now they hide in the shadows, and their gods are quiet as the sands cover their monuments. Athens, which was proud to have the Beacon of Prometheus, destroyed in a civil war. Philosophers who used to quarrel about what fire meant now just argued about whether or not people had the right to live through it. The beacon, which was shattered and broken, still pulsed with unstable energy. This was a bad sign of what people had taken from the skies, and thus, reality 502 fell silent. But it wasn't a peaceful stillness. It was the silence of terror, of loss, and of ruins where voices used to cry out. Travelers talked about walking across whole landscapes that had been burnt by storms, and seeing shadows scorched into buildings where whole households had stood. A Persian scribe wrote, "We are the children of lightning, and it has eaten us." For a while, tiny groups of people lived in the wreckage. Farmers went back to using hand tools. By the light of the moon, fishermen cast nets. There were fires again, but this time they were just plain flames, not electric ones. But even here, the storm's shadow was still there. Never let kids touch copper, never let them make coils, and never let them dream of catching the sky. Stories of brilliant obelisks that only brought death, and monarchs who crowned themselves with lightning and fell in ashes-shaped hole. Generations. What was once the best time for exploration became a curse that people narrated as a story. Centuries later, people from faraway places came to see the ruins of Alexandria, Rome, Athens, and Babylon. They uncovered pieces of devices that no one could explain. Wires welded into stone, gears that were too advanced for their time, and towers that still hummed softly when storms passed overhead. They didn't call it science. They said it was magic. They talked of gods who used to walk among people and were angry enough to burn the planet. The truth was easier. It wasn't gods. It had been people, smart, careless, and impatient, and so reality 502 didn't end in glory but in darkness. The first apocalypse of electricity wiped out centuries of knowledge, leaving behind only stories and ruins. Yes, humanity survived, but it wasn't the same as it could have been. In our world, the spark waited thousands of years, maybe until we were more ready. But in reality 502, the ancients touched the storm too soon, and it ate them all. The pyramids are still there, charred but proud. The Colosseum is still there, with burns that will never go away. The Beacon of Prometheus still hums softly, like a ghost that won't go away, but no one wants to touch them. And amid the quiet of the ancient earth, one lesson rings forth, darker than the ruins themselves. Sometimes, to stay alive, we have to select what we don't find out. Welcome to Beyond the Fractals. Subscribe now and explore every reality.